You're listening to the Toe Talks podcast. You're fired. Why? Well, not because you did anything wrong at work, you weren't doing your job, or you came in late too many times. No, you're fired because you refused to take an experimental drug. Sound familiar? Did you lose your career or livelihood because of the draconian, unconstitutional measures pressed upon you during COVID? You're not alone. I did too. It's our stories that draw us closer to one another in life. Today, we're going to talk about a unique firing surrounding the COVID measures, the truth about jabs, masks, and testing, and the good news. What's that? God will redeem the evil that was done to us. We are the rugged, authentic, savvy, and you're in the right place. Live free. Pursue health. Powerful living starts in 3, 2, 1. Welcome to episode 2 of the Toe Talks podcast. COVID to Caviar, or Beauty to Ashes. I'm your host, Dr. Toe. I want you to think back in your mind's eye over the last 4 years and think about the pandemic and the environment that surrounded it. Hypocrisy was rampant. Fear was the virus. Draconian measures reigned. And there was zero critical thinking occurring in very intelligent people. Right was wrong. Evil was good. The world was upside down. I know some of you may be experiencing PTSD as I begin to recant what things were like, but I think it's very important for us to process some of what happened to us and to validate our feelings. It's also my hope that I can impart some important information to you that you may not know and to encourage you along this journey coming out of COVID so that you too might experience ashes to beauty transformation. So let's get into it. When COVID hit, I was working in probably two of some of the worst places you could be working. I was working in the hospital in an outpatient rehabilitation orthopedic clinic, and I was also working at a college teaching. As COVID progressed, I was very observant, and I soon realized we were going in a very bad direction. When I was at the hospital, there was a specific moment in time where I was stunned and I knew there was evil at play. I was treating a COPD patient. That's somebody who has difficulty breathing because of damage to their lungs for various reasons. I happened to be treating him for a different reason. He was in physical therapy for a joint issue. At the time, everybody was supposed to be wearing masks. He came in and I put him on the treadmill to warm him up. He began to get into respiratory distress. I immediately stopped, took him off the treadmill, put him on a plinth, which is a, clinic table, and proceeded to tell him to take his mask off, put a pulse ox on his finger to see what his oxygen saturation was. I was facing the patient as he was sitting on the table watching him to see how quickly he was going to be able to recover. And suddenly my supervisor appeared behind him. She began to motion that he needed to put his mask back on. And I was shocked. I could not believe it. And so I basically ignored her. And I said to myself, I am not having him put that mask on until I know he has recovered. So I waited, and eventually, it was probably about a minute later that I had him put his mask back on against my will. And that was the moment for me where I was like, yeah, this is bad. I began to distribute information. I made up a mask hazard pamphlet because I knew very well the research that stated prolonged wearing of masks is a health hazard for humans, and they are ineffective at preventing the spread of viruses. Once I had created this pamphlet, I began to distribute it around the hospital. And it was probably a few days later that I was called in to a meeting with my supervisor and another person, probably from human resources. And I was told, quote, I was going to have to leave work early for a day of reflection, end quote. Yes, they told me that I had to leave work early to go and reflect basically on my behavior because I had been disseminating information that went against the hospital's policies in regards to masking. Needless to say, I had to hold my composure, and I basically told them they both know that what they are doing is wrong and that I am fully in the right and I have the right to disseminate this information. It's not harming anybody. As a matter of fact, the hospital policies are harming their employees. So I was a troublemaker from the very beginning, and that came back into play later on. But let's switch gears now to the college environment. I was teaching at a military school that is federally funded. I was witnessing the same type of hypocrisy and non-critical thinking. And you have to remember that these people have PhDs, the staff there, and that this is military. A lot of them are retired military, very smart, very intelligent people. I recall a meeting that I had where we were all meeting outside, social distancing from one another, and they were talking about masks. And I said, we all know that wearing masks for prolonged periods of time is a health hazard. And oh my goodness, did I get the backlash and the talking that I was wrong. I was floored. But there was so much that was going on that was wrong in the college arena. They were testing these cadets weekly, sometimes twice a week. And if it came back positive, they were quarantining them, regardless of whether they were symptomatic or not. And now here's one of the biggest lies of the pandemic. There is no such thing as asymptomatic spread. If you do not have symptoms, you are not contagious. Nowhere in the world did anybody ever get COVID through asymptomatic spread. And by the way, nobody in the world ever got COVID while outside. Why is that? Well, if you looked at the research, you would know that sunlight and wind instantly kill COVID. So does chlorine, by the way. Who here saw people swimming in pools with masks on? That was just part of the hypocrisy. Oh my goodness. I remember when the band teacher was holding band practice outside with the kids social distanced. They had a mask. The kids had a mask on, which then had a slit inside the mask, which my daughter happened to be playing a clarinet. The clarinet mouthpiece would go through her mask, and then the clarinet end had a mask on it as well. I could not believe the idiocracy that was going on. It just drove me insane. I'm sure it did you as well. All right, let's get back to the college arena. I was watching cadets live in tight quarters, eat shoulder to shoulder in masses, and yet they were quarantining these students with these positive test results, regardless of whether they had symptoms or not. As a teacher, a professor, they built these plastic partitions that were probably, I don't know, maybe 8 by 8 feet. And they were on these wheeled partitions that I was supposed to wheel back and forth as I taught in class. Now, I'm going to tell you something. Early on in the pandemic the scamdemic, when they said, you need to social distance 6 feet apart, I knew that was bogus, that they had pulled that out of their behinds, because I had read studies about quiet breathing. So you're not talking, you're not singing, and you're not yelling. And the particles that are coming from your mouth would float past 17.2 feet. And if they were light enough, they could float in the air for hours. Let alone, let's not even talk about a virologist and what they look like when they're studying a virus. They have their own intake and outtake oxygen. They are completely sealed off from the outside world, and people think that a mask is going to filter out a virus. Yeah, insanity. So what was that plastic partition going to do for me and for the students that I was teaching? Nothing. Nothing, absolutely nothing. I was fired from this college in September of 2021. Since the school was a federally funded and military-run school, the governor had to put out an executive order that everyone, no matter if you were remote or in person, had to be jabbed. And I was not fired. This is a unique thing about me and my job loss here, that I was not fired because I did not get the jab. I was fired because I refused to mask and test weekly. But I will say my religious exemption was not accepted, and I'll get into why in a second. It all started when this governor executive order came out, and basically all of the employees were supposed to reveal their vaccination status. And out of 700 employees, I was the only one who refused to tell them my status. The problem with the form was it was either you check yes, I am, or no, I'm not. There was not a third option of I'm not telling you. And if you had read the executive order, you would see that there was the option to not reveal your status, and therefore you would automatically be considered unvaccinated. So I basically filled out this form, didn't check anything, signed it, and added a note saying, I'm not telling you. Basically, they did not like that. No, they did not. And I know for a fact that I was one out of 700 employees because I did some FOIAs, but that's a different story for another time. I then requested informed consent 3 times for the jabs, the masks, and the testing. What are the risk benefits? Never once did I get an answer. The religious exemption that I turned in was to cover masks, testing, and jabs. Now, I say jabs because these COVID shots are not vaccine. They are gene therapy. And here's the reason why I asked for all 3 in the religious exemption, because all 3 are under emergency use authorization. Did you know that? All 3 of them are considered experimental: masks, tests, and jabs. What does EUA mean exactly? Well, if you go to 21 U.S. Code 360 BBB-3, yes, you should memorize this. It talks about authorization for medical products for use in emergencies. Chapter 9, Federal Food and Drug and Cosmetic Act. Subchapter V, Drugs and Devices. Part E, General Provisions Relating to Drugs and Devices. Now, very important for you to know, the COVID jab is a drug. The testing and masks are considered medical devices. And anybody who is distributing these products or administering them are to provide informed consent about the emergency use of the product, of the significant known and potential benefits and risks of such use, and of the extent to which such benefits and risks are unknown. And this is the key point that you need to know, of the option to accept or refuse the administration of the product, of the consequences, if any, of refusing administration of the product, and of alternatives to the product that are available, and of their benefits and risks. Now, this is really important. This is why the drug ivermectin was vilified so atrociously. It's probably the safest drug on earth. The jab would have never gotten FDA approval for EAU if there was an alternative repurposed drug that was effective. And so they had to vilify it as unsafe in order to pass the EUA over these toxic experimental gene therapy jabs. But don't miss the major point here. You and I both have the right under U.S. law to refuse anything that is under EUA, anything that is considered experimental. We have the right to refuse all 3. And that is why my religious exemption to this college and to the hospital covered all 3. My exemption was not accepted under the guise that they could not accommodate me for not wearing a mask or testing. When the truth is, I'd been teaching in person almost the entire time that I was allowed to. Unfortunately, there was probably one student in one of my classes and another, maybe two students in another class that were unvaccinated. Well, if masks work and the jab works to protect those individuals and social distancing worked, then we could have simply social distanced and all of us should have been fine. No need for masks, no need for testing. If those things work, then what's the problem, right? But unfortunately, that is not what happened. I was quickly relieved of my job. And then 8 months later from that firing, I was also relieved from my hospital job. And that was somewhat of a game of chicken. They never really accepted my COVID exemption. But regardless, 2 job losses within 8 months of each other. This was a very difficult time for me, as I'm sure it was for many of you. And not just on the job front. Let's just talk about the impact on family relationships, friends, colleagues. I think this was a great litmus test to who was really my friend. Very difficult to watch my kids be damaged by these awful, unconstitutional, draconian measures that were applied to them in school. So what did I do? I marched in January of 2022, I marched at the Defeat the Mandates March in D.C. when SCOTUS decided to, what I like to say, split the baby, go the cowards route, straddle the fence on this issue when they decided that businesses, it was a no-go to be able to have to mandate the jab. But for anybody who took Medicare and Medicaid money, it was just completely fine that you had to mandate, that you were allowed to mandate the requirement of the jab. Ridiculous that they had done that. They knew in doing this that they would cripple the rural areas because at least 80,000 healthcare workers would immediately walk off the job. And they did. And I have seen the impact of their decision. But not only that, it was unconstitutional. If it was not constitutional for private businesses, then that means it should have been unconstitutional for everybody to mandate the jabs. But we all know you follow the money. There's a reason behind this evil, and there was most certainly a lockstep plan that was occurring. This was the other thing that I was noticing, that this was not just happening in the United States, it was happening worldwide at the same time. They had coordinated it. And if you don't know anything about this, you should go look it up. Go look up Event 201 that was put on in October of 2019 by the World Economic Forum. The title to it is Live Simulation Exercise to Prepare Public and Private Leaders for Pandemic Response. They did a mock pandemic just before the pandemic. They basically told everybody what the plan was. Go check it out. You'll see what I mean. I digress. Let's get back to Defeat the Mandates March. I had the fortune of being interviewed by OAN News. Unfortunately, I was a little nervous, and in the beginning you hear some word salad like our friend VP Harris. It's kind of comical, but I think you'll appreciate what was said during this interview. Let's listen in.
And where are you from?
I'm from Virginia.
And so why are you here today?
I'm here because I'm a healthcare worker, and I believe in freedom for all and not for some. And right now, healthcare workers are under the thumb of the mandates. And if it should be freedom for all, not for some. So I'm here to march in the name of freedom.
And so have you noticed, as a frontline healthcare worker, how you guys are put in a difficult position with these, I guess a lot of doctors are saying, with these other preventative treatments that you guys aren't able to use?
Yeah, there are a lot of early treatments that should be being used right now. A lot of prevention treatments that are far more superior than the vaccines. and safer. Ivermectin, for instance, the safety index on that is safer than Advil and Tylenol. And so to mandate an experimental drug that you can't take back once you put it in your bloodstream is it's unconscionable to me. I'm here today to march for the freedom to say no, the freedom for body autonomy, the freedom for patients to say no, this is my body, I realize what the risks are, and I have the right to say no if I want to. I think in the light of how risky it is to take these vaccines, it's not a good choice for people, and they should have the right to say no.
And so as you've actually gathered here today with your sign and everything, what have you noticed? Like, what's a common theme amongst people here and from people who you've heard speak?
I think people are tired of having their freedom stepped on. I think Americans know that something's not right. I think people here are ready to stand up and be uncomfortable. I think people are finding their voices. I think the masses need to know that they have the power. And the small portions of the population that are putting these mandates and these unconstitutional laws or premises on the people, I think people are starting to wake up. And I think if you look around, there are people here that are vaccinated, unvaccinated. We are all Americans. We all bleed the same. And our rights don't hinge on the fact of what's in our blood. Our rights hinge on the fact that we have God-given rights. And I think that's the common theme that's going on right now.
Thank you for joining me on One American News.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Definitely a little word salad there at the beginning. And you could hear Dr. Malone, the inventor of the mRNA technology, in the background as he was speaking. Soon after I was fired, I also began to go into a deep research mode. And as a result of being canceled and censored and fired, I created a Telegram channel, watched the quality of healthcare decline, no longer trusted the medical community, and acquired the book Turtles All the Way Down. If you don't have this reference book, I highly recommend it. It came out in 2019. The authors were genius in that they anonymously wrote it so that their character would not be attacked, but instead only the research or the data could be attacked. And it could not have come out at a better time. I highly recommend it. It's what converted me into an anti-vaxxer. There is very little research that demonstrates the effectiveness and the safety of these jabs that are being given to our children in general and to us. I also had to protect some people in my life that were immune compromised. And my research led me to come to understand that there was a cure to COVID, and that COVID, the survival rate was actually better than the flu. And FYI, the flu disappeared. I don't think it disappeared. I think they just called it COVID. Anyway, vitamin C, D, E, zinc, magnesium, ivermectin, HCQ, and natural immunity were so very important to fighting off and maintaining a good immune system. The cure to COVID was ivermectin. No doubt in my mind. No jab was ever needed. But the fact that they wanted to put jabs in every single arm was a major red flag for me in the beginning. I knew before that a shot went into an arm in the United States that I and no one in my family was going to get these. I knew what the research said about it, and they purposely did not do any animal research to have any negative data on it, because there was research done on the mRNA technology in general. The animals died. So you might be asking yourself, well, Dr. Toe, what killed people then? 3 things killed people. No early treatment. They stopped treating people when they started having symptoms. This has never happened in the history of medical interventions. We always treat when symptoms begin. There is no waiting. If you can treat, you treat. People lost their minds. And because of that, people got so bad that they waited to go to the hospital until the point that they were under distress and really severely in trouble. This is the reason why you're seeing healthcare workers dancing in the hallways of hospitals, because nobody was going to the hospital because they were telling people not to, or they were turning them away when they came early on for treatment. They basically said, come back when you can't breathe. 2, hospital protocols killed people. I call them the hospital ovens. They put people on remdesivir. They did not give steroids. They did not give antibiotics. They did not give ivermectin. And they put people on ventilators and killed them. If you don't know about this drug, remdesivir, you should. There is a military whistleblower by the name of Daniel LeMay who published what is now called the Remdesivir Papers. It's a 4-year program that was occurring in the military that resulted in 601 deaths out of 941 people that this drug was administered to. That is a 64% death rate. It is out of this world. The nurses at the time began to call this drug Run, Death is Near, and for good reason. And this was Fauci's baby. He wanted this to become the standard of care for COVID, and it did. Fauci knew that this drug was dangerous. Why? Because there was an Ebola study that occurred way before the pandemic happened. Several drugs were used in the study. The study had to be shut down because people were dying, and they were dying because of the medication that was being administered. And the most deadly one was remdesivir. It shuts down people's kidneys. And when it shuts down people's kidneys, fluid builds up in their lungs. And they were calling it COVID pneumonia. No. This was drug-induced pneumonia. And then they would put them on ventilators to finish them off. And that's what happened. People began to die as soon as they were put on remdesivir and ventilators. Let's listen in on what Daniel LeMay had to say about remdesivir recently.
What remdesivir does is it allows us to kind of open our aperture and realize that what happened over the last couple of years is bigger than just lockdowns. It's bigger than just COVID shots. There were other things that were also just as problematic, like the widespread use of remdesivir as an ostensible treatment protocol for those that ostensibly had, COVID-19. Over a 4-year period from March of 2020 to March of 2024, a significant number of people in the wider military community were administered remdesivir. And of those 941 individuals that were administered remdesivir, 601 of them died. That's a death rate of 64%. So, what caused their deaths? Was it the remdesivir directly? Were there other factors? Should we know? Should we at least be asking questions? And can we trust the fact that DOD has not been forthcoming with this information?
Number 3, the jabs. If you go to VAERS, which is an acronym for Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, you'll see that the COVID vaccine deaths to date are 37,966. Now, you need to add a 0 to the end of that because unfortunately, these adverse reactions are 10 times underreported. Not only deaths are reported on this system, but also adverse reactions and injuries. And they are far greater than the death reports, but all of them are significant. You should also know that more people have died from the COVID jab in the first 4 months of 2021 than all vaccine deaths in the last 13 plus years of reporting with this system. That is a 6,000% increase in reporting of vaccine deaths in the first quarter of 2021 compared to the first quarter of 2020. Now, some people, you'll hear them say, oh, that system's not really reliable, Dr. Toe. But there is a system out there that is very accurate. It's the most accurate you'll ever find anywhere. It is called DMED, another acronym for Defense Medical Epidemiology Database. It's the most controlled population you could have, and that's because it's military-based. A whistleblower in August of 2023 revealed that the diagnosis of myocarditis among military had increased by 130% in 2021 when compared to the average from the years 2016 to 2020. Myocarditis is a serious condition that can lead to death. It is not normal in any sense of the term, and certainly not normal for young individuals. Pulmonary emboli was up by 41.2%. Blood clots in the lungs, ovarian dysfunction, 38.2%. And the list goes on and on from the DMED. So, if people argue that the VAERS is not accurate, I have to give them the sad news that it's actually worse than that, because the DMED is reflecting the reality of just how bad it is. So you might be wondering, Dr. Toe, if these COVID jabs are not the answer, what is the answer? Well, the answer is early treatment and prevention. And I wrote a book because I had people in my life that I wanted to protect during this time. It's an ebook. It's called Kicking the Viral Load. My husband was immune compromised. I wanted to boost his immune system as best I could. And I want to tell you that natural immunity is still king. People began to come to me for advice about jabs, masks, COVID testing, natural immunity. And so I decided, you know what? Let's just put all this information in one place for everybody to benefit from. And if you would like this ebook, please go to www.drtoe.com to get your own free copy of it. I hope it blesses you and your family. Everybody should have an infirmary in their own home and be prepared for illness while you're at home and while you are traveling. So very important. So what, Dr. Toe, you might be saying to yourself, what does all this matter? Why in the heck did this awful pandemic and its consequences occur to us? So what's the beauty in all of these ashes, Dr. Toe? Where's the caviar? Where is it? Well, I want to tell you that because I was fired and went down into this deep research hole, I found extremely important information which saved my family from being jabbed. My husband is still alive because of my research. In general, my eyes were opened, and this podcast was born. I needed to know there are other people out there who were just as like-minded as me, that didn't look at me like I had three heads and I was crazy when I started to tell them what I think was going on and what was wrong with what was happening during the scamdemic. Can anybody relate to that? I bet you there's some hands going up right now. This is why you are in the right place, because this podcast is for you and me. There is good among the bad. God will redeem and avenge for us. If you haven't found the beauty in the ashes, or you're still looking for the caviar from the COVID, keep looking. It's coming, or it's there. You just haven't seen it yet. It took me a while to see it as well. In time, I do believe God will redeem all the wrongs that were done. Keep walking forward, my friend. Keep your head high. Keep looking up. Stay focused. Stay hopeful. Romans 12:12 says, "Be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, and faithful in prayer." Well, that's a wrap, my friends. If you like what you heard and it helped you and you want to hear more, please subscribe. If you're new here, welcome to the podcast. I'm so glad you're along on this journey with me. We have each other, and we are not alone. Next episode on the Toe Talks podcast, 2020, the year that sucked, COVID and cancer. Live free, pursue health, and breathe deep. Until next time, everybody, this is Dr. Toe signing off. Important disclaimer. This podcast is presented solely for educational and entertainment purposes. I am not a medical doctor, and I do not diagnose, advise, or treat. This podcast is not intended for the substitute of advice from a personal physician, professional coach, psychotherapist, or other qualified professional. It is not intended to be used or relied upon for any diagnostic or treatment purposes, or to be used as a substitute for professional diagnosis, treatment, or conventional medical therapy. None of the statements made in this podcast have been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. Please consult your healthcare provider before making any healthcare decisions or for guidance about specific medical conditions. Listen responsibly.